Hello and welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, we have one of our career services program students, and he's going to be talking directly to an analytics hiring manager. So Peter Tobiassen is a hiring manager who happens to be friends with Alex Epperly. So a few weeks ago, he commented on the Alex Epperly episode on YouTube and said, "Hey, I know Alex, I really enjoyed this episode, and I would love to come on your podcast and talk to your students." So Richard Wang just enrolled in our program for the career service offering, and he is just wrapping up a Master's of Analytics program. In this episode, Hunter Brown, our Silvertone Analytics employee, is going to be facilitating the conversation between these two. Richard is in our career services program, and this program is quite a bit different than our apprenticeship program. Our apprenticeship program is a 3-month program. The career services is just a 1-month intensive program. You could almost think of it as a career accelerator. You're going to get to work with real data. So I'm going to be pulling data from my Silvertone Analytics learning platform. So building a portfolio built on real data is just so much better than what you probably get in a master's program. This is data that I have built over the last 2 years launching my own company. You're also going to get expert advice on how to build a personal brand. And we have a challenge within that 1 month of sending out at least 100 applications. So if you're interested to learn more about the program, click the link in the description down below. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about networking before we jump into the episode. So how we found Peter, or actually I should say how Peter found us, can apply to you. So one thing that I am trying to hammer into my students' head over and over and over again is the importance of a digital footprint. So you need to put yourself out online. And I know that social media is a drag and it feels vapid and just I don't know, cringeworthy overall. But if you were consistently putting content on places like LinkedIn, you can start to grow a following, and who knows, you might start to attract hiring managers just like Peter.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. Today, we are joined by 2 phenomenal guests. First is Peter Tobiassen. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep, you got it.
And Richard Wang, who is one of our students. He just joined up with Silvertone not too long ago. And so I want to go ahead and get started with you, Peter. Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What you do?
Sure. I currently work for an e-commerce startup here in Baltimore called Whitebox. So we're an e-commerce fulfillment company. I run their product support team. So we support all the in-house software and the custom hardware that we use in our fulfillment centers and stuff like that. But it's been kind of a long path to getting to this point in my career. I got my undergraduate degree in architecture, like not software architecture, not systems architecture, like just brick and mortar, like actual building architecture. But I knew that wasn't really what I wanted to do. When I got out of school, I ended up sort of doing some kind of like with like a paid internship at like a defense contractor. And ended up on a contract there supporting the Army on site at a Army base here in Maryland. It was kind of one of those like entry level positions, but because sort of the nature of the contract that I was on, there wasn't a lot of room to move up or anything. But I got to do some kind of cool work. I got to dip my toe into some analysis and policy writing there, and decided that I wanted to go back to school, and I got my master's degree in public policy. And that's sort of where I learned a lot about economics and statistics and stuff like that. Really enjoyed doing that. I interned for the National Beer Wholesalers Association. So they're like a industry trade group.
Did you get to taste test any of the beer?
We did get to taste test a lot of the beers. They actually had a bar in the office.
Oh wow, that's pretty awesome.
So we would have some pretty fun like happy hours at the office. And I was doing a lot of market research for them. Doing a lot of I was working for their chief economist, so I was doing a lot of like economics research for them. And I actually ended up partnering with them to write my theses at the University of Maryland, where I went. They encourage us to partner up with like a professional partner to do our research theses to get some kind of real world experience. So I wrote about e-commerce in the alcohol industry, which was just starting to emerge, and kind of created a guide about existing alcohol regulations in e-commerce and kind of some suggestions on like what direction that should go in. Um, that thesis kind of ended up landing me my first real job out of grad school as an e-commerce analyst. So I was working in the reverse supply chain, which is kind of an odd part of the supply chain not a lot of people think about. But like when you send your returns back to say Amazon because you don't like the thing or it doesn't fit or whatever, like what happens to that is a whole industry in and of itself. So I was working there, doing a lot of like pricing analysis. We were also building some applications for our clients to use. We were doing some dashboards and data analysis for them to look at the data that we had in the application. And then when COVID hit, it kind of was one of those crazy things where like the company I was working for had to furlough some people. And my boss was one of the people that was furloughed, and he subsequently left. And at the time, I was ending up direct reporting to like a senior vice president who didn't really know anything about what our team was doing and was just sort of like, oh, that app that you guys were developing, like you're the only one that worked on that. So that's your project now, plus all the other stuff that you do every day. And I was like, okay, I'll try my best. And I really enjoyed working with our software developer that we had on the team and building this application. And I was doing a lot of sort of like, product marketing and product design, as well as sort of like technical support for the application. And I was like, that's really something that I want to do kind of full time. So I had a recruiter who found me on LinkedIn. I don't think he'll mind a shout out. Nick Chester from Baytech Recruiting. He recruits for a lot of tech positions and analytics positions, usually in like the Baltimore area, but remote as well. He reached out to me. He was awesome to work with. He was like, yeah, there's this great startup that I recruit for, and they do a lot of the same stuff you're doing, and they're building a lot of that in house, and they need someone to, run the tech support for all of that and support the product they're making. So they were looking for someone with a lot of SQL experience, which I had, and some coding experience, which I had a very little bit of. But it was a really great fit. And so I've been there for almost 2 years now. I've really enjoyed that. I get to use kind of some of the technical background that I have and been able to expand that a lot. And then, we also use a lot of analytics, and we're building a lot of analytics tools to use the e-commerce data that we have. So, I've been fortunate enough to kind of be in a position to build out these teams sort of from scratch. So I've had some experience, interviewing and hiring people for my teams, and I've also assisted some of our data science teams and some other teams in hiring folks there as part of our sort of like interview panel process that we do at Whitebox. And I'm happy to kind of share with you guys my experience in kind of going through the job search on the candidate side, but also kind of what I'm looking for when I'm interviewing candidates and people applying for jobs.
Well, it certainly sounds like you have a diverse experience portfolio. Lots of transitioning going on there. So you said you started out in architecture and then you went more into researching. Did you draw anything from what you learned in school when you decided to switch over, or did you have to learn a lot of that stuff yourself?
Um, a lot of that was on the job learning, for sure. I do think that a lot of the sort of like fundamental concepts of design that I learned in architecture, those are pretty foundational. I found and are translated to a lot of things that I do, just that design process. And even when I'm designing technical processes or talking about how we're going to build software, like I'm thinking about fundamental design concepts like usability and like how is someone going to interact with this and stuff. And that's true whether it's, how is someone going to interact with this space in a building, and as well as how is someone going to interact with these buttons that I'm putting on the screen for them and stuff. So there's definitely some part of design that will like always be with me. But I think, I've also learned just a lot of new skills kind of along the way.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of our listeners who start out in a completely different field and somehow
Yeah,
end up in analytics together. It's like this big melting pot of a community.
definitely.
So you mentioned going into your current job that you actually had very little coding experience, that you were more familiar with SQL. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I had learned SQL was the database we used for the app we were building at my last job, and I just kind of had to learn that. And then I was messing with Python a little bit on the side, but that was about it.
do you use code a lot in your current job?
Oh yeah, yeah. I use JavaScript now pretty much every day. Definitely use SQL every day. But and we use like TypeScript and Node and all that stuff for web applications and stuff. So I spend a lot of time reading people's code, debugging people's code, trying to come up with bug fixes for people's code. So I do that a lot.
So considering that you didn't go into your job having a lot of code experience, did you kind of go around that question when the recruiter was asking you, or did you like just become up full honesty, be like, hey, I'm not that familiar, but I'm willing to learn?
Yeah, I was very upfront. I said, I've been learning Python. Like I kind of understand a lot of the fundamental, logic and stuff behind it. And I think that I can apply that, but like I am going to have to learn some of that on the job. I haven't worked with JavaScript before, and I was upfront with both the recruiter as well as my current boss who was interviewing me at the time. And I think that what he saw in me was that, I did have this kind of foundational knowledge, but I also had sort of this curiosity and this, willingness to learn. And his takeaway was sort of like, yeah, you picked this stuff up, you picked up this Python, you picked up this SQL stuff pretty quickly. Like you clearly can do it. And, if I have to teach you a little bit, like that's fine, but you have a lot of these other qualities that I'm looking for. So I can teach you the code stuff along the way.
I gotcha. And so you being a hiring manager now, or at least being familiar with the recruiting area, are you looking for people who really do fit all of those criteria they put out, or are you looking for somebody who is at least familiar with some of it, like knows enough to be dangerous kind of deal, and then they're willing to pick up the rest while they're working?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think, fundamentally what I'm looking for in someone breaks down to kind of like two things. Like I think fundamentally, and I think this is probably true for anyone who's ever hired for a job, whether they do it consciously or subconsciously. But the reasons people are hiring for a job is that either they have too much work on their desk that they can't get done, so they need to hire someone to help them with it, or they have work on their desk that they don't necessarily know how to do, and they don't really have the time to go learn that. So they're hiring to fill a knowledge gap, right? And I think fundamentally everything I'm doing when I'm reading resumes, when I'm interviewing someone, if someone's doing some sort of skills assessment, what I'm looking for, are you going to take the work off my desk that I need taken off my desk? And I think that your resume and your interview and all those things, those are tools for you to communicate to me that you're someone who's going to take work off my desk and not create more work for me. So I think, I'm not necessarily looking for the person that has the perfect background or the, every skill under the sun. I don't expect them to come in day one and just take a stack of work off my desk and run away with it. But like, I'm looking for people that I think, within 3 to 6 months, I'm going to get them to a point where they're doing more work than they're creating.
Mm-hmm. Right. So So Peter, you listening to this and Richard, you listening to this and hearing, hey, maybe I don't need to know every single little minute detail that's on this job listing. Um, I'd imagine that probably takes quite a bit of weight off your shoulders.
Definitely, especially nowadays, if you go on Indeed and you see all of the job descriptions is 3 to 5 years of experience, that's basically like all of the jobs out there. So, and I went to school but after I graduated, I realized when I talking about Python or SQL, like my brain just went blank most of the time. So I start to have the kind of feeling like I don't know about anything. So, but actually I do. After Google search, like 10 minutes of Google search, I can pick up my memory, but most of the time I do feel like I don't know about anything. But what you said just, totally makes sense. Is when you're looking for jobs, you're basically looking for people who have the ability to learn and to improve with the foundation knowledge they have.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, so Richard, you actually touched on something, a little bit of imposter syndrome, it sounds like you have, where it's like you have all this knowledge that you know you've accumulated and you've done work with it, but it's hard for you to communicate that to people. Is that what I'm gathering?
Yes, it is quite. It is pretty challenging to to tell other people what you have done, especially from the grad school space. Every couple weeks you went through one class, you did all sort of project, and then like after the class finished, you just move on to the next class. So I was able to gather all of the knowledge, and at the moment I know how to do it. But after that, they just sort of fade away, and is very hard to when you go to the interview, tell me what you learned from the like tell me more about this project or tell me more about this program. It could be very hard at the moment to come up things, like just basic things.
So Peter, having experience on both sides, hiring, being hired, do you have any methods of communication that you found to be particularly effective in the hiring process?
Yeah, I think that Richard, you bring up a very common, kind of like anxiety that people have when interviewing and trying to communicate all that knowledge that they have, all that work that they've done. I think this is kind of a weird thing that I do. Like I did this even before, this interview is like I talk to myself. I will think about the types of things that are going to come up in the interview, and I'll think about my answers, and just kind of like as I'm walking around the house doing other stuff, thinking about, this podcast interview, I'm kind of like mumbling under my breath, like what I would answer and stuff. And, it seems kind of weird, but if you kind of do that, in the days leading up to an interview, those answers are going to come a lot more naturally. Some people like to write things down. Some like I said, I like to talk to myself. But I think that's part of the preparation for an interview. The other thing I would say is don't think too long on like what questions specifically are going to come up. Don't think too much about, am I prepared for all the right things? Think about the things you want to talk about. And it's much easier to control an interview than you might think. And a lot of interview questions end up kind of being different variations of the same thing, like, and I think that's because people are trying to find the candidates that are going to solve problems, right? That are going to be able to, work through a problem without a ton of supervision or guidance, eventually. Like, again, like you don't have to be perfect on day one. So, if you can think about things that really communicate like, oh, this was a time that I had a challenge in grad school, and like here's the process I went through to like overcome that, right? I did this research, or I stayed up late working on it, or I went and found a resource at the school that I was at, or from a classmate to help me out with this. I think if you can come up with that scenario, come up with that story, and kind of tell it to yourself a few times, then when you get some variation of like when's the time you had to overcome a challenge, like you're gonna have that ready to go. And even if you don't get that question, you might get some other question where you can be like, oh yeah, that's a really interesting question. It reminds me of this time that I did this project, and then just kind of talk about the challenge then. And like, I don't think people, for the most part, people aren't looking for specific answers in the interview. They're looking to see that, again, you're going to be that worker that's going to help them out, and that's going to take that workload off of them or off their team. So I think that's kind of how I've prepared for interviews in the past. I think, preparation is a big thing, doing your research about who you're interviewing with. You don't have to know every part of their life detail, but it's always nice to be able to say, oh, I saw this blog post you did 5 years ago about something you were working on at that time, or if you have some shared interest or something like that. I think that helps a little bit to break the ice and kind of make you less nervous when you can say like, oh, I saw this thing you did. Like I had a candidate that found a YouTube video that my boss made in 2008 when he had first started his first company, and he was talking about how like awkward that was and stuff like that. And he brought that up in the interview, and I was like, wow, like this guy, one, did a bunch of research about this company, but two, like it was funny to talk about like my goofy boss, 20 years ago, like on some silly YouTube video and stuff. So I think that helps a lot. So yeah, I would say, think about what you want to put forward in the interview, and then it's just a matter of finding a way to get that across. And like, even if you kind of ham-fist it in, even if it's not the exact answer to the exact question they asked, if it's a good story, if it's shows you in a good light, like it's gonna get you good marks in an interview.
It's interesting that you say storytelling with data. It's something that we propose all the time on the podcast.
Yeah.
Can you give us, and this is kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, can you give us an example of a story having to do with data?
Of a story having to do with data? Yeah. One of the things that I worked on when I was in that internship at the beer wholesalers was the question came up of whether the legalization of marijuana was going to help, hurt, or have no effect on the alcohol industry in terms of like sales and consumption. I think there were a lot of people that sort of intuitively said, well, if marijuana becomes legal, there's going to be a bunch of people that choose that over choosing to have a drink socially with friends or something like that. And so that's going to hurt the alcohol industry. And so we went in and we looked at sales trends in states that had legalized marijuana. We looked at all sorts of data from, people who were, answering questions. I think there's that big high school survey that they take about substance abuse and stuff. Not that I would ever advocate like drinking or smoking weed in high school or anything, but what we found was these trends in all this data that showed that like, no, it really didn't. They weren't perfect substitutes for each other, and that gains in one didn't come to losses at the other, from losses at the other. And so that was a really interesting analysis. And then we put together a presentation sort of showing that like, we didn't think that there was going to be a significant impact to the alcohol industry with the legalization of marijuana more broadly. And I think that was something that like, that's a story that kind of put a lot of people in that industry at ease. Right. And, there was a lot of, questions about like, should the alcohol industry be supporting or opposing laws and policies about that and stuff, because it's going to hurt their business. And, I think that was definitely an interesting story to tell with data.
So I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, or if this is just subconscious for you at this point, but you literally just used the STAR method. You identified a situation, whether or not legalization of marijuana would affect booze sales. The task was to identify sales trends and survey data You ended up using some visualizations and analysis to figure out the result that no, it didn't. And so that right there, Richard, is a prime example of how to tell an effective story. And really, really, Peter, you didn't talk technicalities really at all. It was pretty much just generally how the project went for you. I think a lot of analysts get really tied into the technical. Oh, I did this and this calculation, and it's like no, 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 no. Recruiters don't want to hear that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that I've never heard of that method, so it was definitely subconscious. But that is a great breakdown. Yeah, but you're 100% right. Something that, as I've moved even more into a technical field, but this is going to be true for analysts, is going to be true for people doing BI or machine learning or data science or whatever. Especially the more technical you get, the more you have to learn to communicate to different audiences, right? And you may be interviewing for a job where you may interview with 3 or 4 people from that company. I know our company has people interview with the hiring manager, someone else from sort of that team or that department, and then 2 other people from totally different departments that they might interact with in that position, but that are, and especially for when I've been hiring, it's not technical people, right? It's account managers, it's operations folks from the warehouse and stuff. And one of the things that I'm looking for when we go back and we talk through that candidate afterwards, like on that panel, is I'm looking to see kind of how they interviewed with those less technical people, right? Because at the end of the day, they're going to have to explain their work, or they're going to have to interact with these people. They're going to have to explain highly technical concepts to people that don't have that technical background. And their ability to do that, especially in a tech support role, is really important. And I think, definitely, like when I was doing analysis at my last job in e-commerce, there were times where we were, doing regressions to get demand curves for products so we could do pricing and stuff. And that was really cool. And I would like nerd out to that all day. And like my boss was like really cool with that. But then when we had to go explain that to like some VPs or something like that, they didn't care what a linear regression was. Like they just wanted to hear, this is how accurate our pricing model has been. And so how you present to different audiences, how you communicate to different audiences is really important. Again, like that frontline recruiter, yeah, they're not someone that knows Python, right? Or SQL. They're going to want to hear that you say words that sound SQL-y, and they're going to be like, cool, check that box. And but if you're talking to the actual hiring manager, then yeah, they might want to hear a little bit more about your technical background, or they might understand a little bit more of that. But yeah, I would say you don't have to get super technical, generally speaking, unless they're asking you to do a skill assessment, or they've asked you a highly technical question. But I think another thing that's really important that people in technical fields and in analytical fields sometimes struggle with, and I think sort of the more technical you get, the more you see this, is you have to remember that you are going to go work for a business. So you need to know what that business does and how that business works. And
Yeah, I was actually gonna ask you about interacting with the company before you get hired. If you were gonna talk a
yeah,
little bit about that, yeah.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, yeah, that process starts before you get hired, right? I mean, it's going to their website. If you were going to be interviewing for a tech support position at my job or something like that, right? I don't expect you to know how e-commerce works in that interview, right? But I expect you to kind of know what e-commerce is and kind of understand that what our business does in e-commerce, right? We take orders in from websites, we store the products in our facilities, and then we ship them out on behalf of our customer. If you have that level of understanding in the interview, I'm going to be like pretty impressed that you like took the time to go read our website, and that you like understood what that meant. And if you didn't, you went and like looked some things up. And also, like, maybe you have some questions about that. Maybe you say, hey, I was reading your website and I saw this and I don't really understand that. Like, could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I think too often people want to hear employees want to hear perfect requirements. They want to get a checklist of everything that they need, because then they can go off into their corner and do their job and, write their code or make their dashboard, and it'll be perfect because they checked all the boxes. But like the reality is like you're never going to get that, right? People don't know what they want. People think they know what they want, and it's wrong. You're going to deal with executives that just don't have time to give you that checklist, right? They're just going to say, I want to understand this thing, and you're going to have to parse out of that, like, okay, what data is available? How am I going to research this? How am I going to put this together for them? And so if you understand the business, their question's going to make a lot more sense. So, going into the interview, demonstrating that you've started to learn a little bit about that business, and having some questions about the things you don't maybe quite understand, that shows me that you're curious enough to want to learn about that. And that if I hire you, you're not just going to sit there and like want to be spoon-fed requirements and like write your little code in your corner. You're going to ask the right questions. And if I say something ridiculous, like, hey, go build me this thing and it should work this way, if that doesn't make sense to you, you're going to say something. And I think that's our best developers, our best analysts that I work with are the ones that say like, well, hold on a second. Like, someone asked for this, but like, this doesn't make sense. There's gotta be a better way to do this. Like, this is really inefficient for our operations team. Can we talk about this? And their products and their deliverables, like, they show for that, because they are taking the time to learn about the business, and they are taking the time to understand that background. And one of the things that I've done, this, beyond just being successful in interviews and getting a job, like, once I've gotten the job, I set up lunches with like our VPs and our directors once a quarter, and I just like go have lunch with them and ask them, what are your teams working on? Like, how can we help you with those things? What are you guys struggling with? And you learn a lot about the rest of the business by doing that, and you learn a lot about leadership by doing that. You learn all sorts of valuable things when you just go have lunch with the leaders in the company. So I would definitely say, once you do get a job, don't be afraid to go reach out to people that are higher up from you and just say, hey, let's go have lunch. I have all sorts of questions for you. And then like have questions for them for sure.
Yeah. I've got a question. Speaking of questions, I've got a question for you. What is your opinion on showing up to an interview and asking for maybe some sample data from the company to work with? Do you feel like that shows initiative, or do you feel like maybe that's like being taken advantage of a little bit, of doing free work? Because I know in the past when we've talked about it, John David is not a super big fan of doing free work for companies. But I just want to get your take on that.
No, I definitely, I would agree. I would never ask someone to do real work for my company as part of an interview. I don't think that that's appropriate. I did develop a quick skills assessment that I use for like the most entry level people. And it's bogus data. And it's based off of a real issue that I saw once, but it's a very simple issue. And I do all the research for them. I basically say, here's the issue. Here's the SQL query you wrote. I give them the query. Here's the results you got. And it's really to see, can they think critically? Can they kind of root cause the issue given the thing? And can they write a good, ticket that communicates that effectively, and it's not a ticket that I would ever use. Like, we've already solved this problem, but it's really meant to take, and I tell people like, this should not take you more than 30 minutes. Really, it shouldn't take you more than like 15 minutes. I've even kind of moved away from using that as I've started to hire more like mid-level people and stuff, where I just don't know that I need to validate that so much. But yeah, I can only speak for myself. I'm not a huge fan of having people do genuine work, for free. I think that that's wrong. And I do try and keep skills assessments to a minimum. I do see that there's like some times when you have to validate that someone has the skills that they say they do, but
So where I've noticed a lot of those companies that are requiring applicants to do work is maybe jobs that are not as high quality in general. Maybe they're a little bit either they have misguided expectations for what they're looking for in an interviewee, or it's maybe illegitimate because there's on the job sites nowadays there's quite a few. How do yeah, this is another good question. How do you when you're on the job search, how do you cipher through all of those bum uh postings? Like if you're making a job posting, obviously you know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You know what verbiage to use. Is there like specific verbiage in like illegitimate posts?
Uh, I've been fortunate to never have really encountered that. And I've the last couple of jobs I've had have gone through recruiters that I've like been able to speak to and everything. So I don't know how to filter through that. Certainly doing large amounts of work for someone, under the
Red
table
flag.
and off the record, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I've even, when I was searching for jobs previously, like if this is going to sound a little bit like spoiled and privileged, but like if a job made me like upload my resume and then copy and paste everything into like a whole bunch of other fields, I just didn't do it. I was just like, nah, I'm good. I'm going to go find other jobs that are easier to apply for. Like this isn't really worth my time. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely, I think that's something that
Well,
hopefully
Richard,
people have an instinct for, but yeah, that's tough. I've never encountered that.
Richard, let me ask you this.
Yes.
I'm assuming you're getting ready to start doing some of the application process, or maybe you've already started.
Yes.
Have you noticed any of what I'm talking about with these
Uh,
iffy postings?
of course. Yes. So basically, I did a lot of job application. I started from LinkedIn, and then they were routing me to the company's website. And then I have to create the account for individual companies, basically every companies, and I have to, upload it. And sometimes the format is wrong, and I have to re-edit it. That's like majority of the company nowadays. I do have to do extra work for every company and building up the account for every companies. And I basically at one point I have to create a folder, in my emails for all of those companies, like 30 or 40 account, different password, and redo it all the time.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds super frustrating. I would definitely, I mean, that's good feedback for me to hear. Like I will definitely go to RHR and ask them like, hey, do we make people do this? Cause that's ridiculous. We shouldn't do that. Cause that's the other thing. Like your resume is a tool of communication. I like to get people's actual resumes. I don't want to see some like monotype printout of the resume that they copied and pasted in there that's all formatted the same way. Like, I want to see that their resume communicates the right things up front. I'm people say, oh, they only look at your resume for like 10 seconds. I mean, I look at resumes for like longer than that. Not a lot. I mean, it might be a minute or two. But the best resumes are the ones that in a minute or two, I've seen all I need to see, right? Even if the candidate isn't right for the job, I still appreciate like a good resume where I can say, wow, this isn't the right job for them, but like, this is a great resume. Like I know exactly what they're about, so yeah, that is really frustrating. I think that's something you could give as feedback, honestly, like in an interview, if you could say, yeah, it was really hard to apply for this. And I think like something that you guys can improve that might attract more candidates and stuff in the future is to, improve this application process. And like, here's some of the ways you can do that. That's something that again, like would make you stand out. That would seem impressive of like, okay, this is a person who's going to come in and want to solve problems. And this is a person that understands that hiring and recruiting is a part of our business and that we need to maintain talent. And, anything that that you could do to give that feedback to the HR team or even to the hiring manager who they could give to the HR team. Like, that's valuable.
So, Richard, how many, so you said 30 or 40 applications you've
Yes.
made at this point?
Yes.
Have you gotten any responses?
I got 1 or 2 responses, and so I used to work in the bank as a fraud specialist. And this March, I left that job to focus on the analytic career, and I decided to put all of myself into school. So after I graduated, I reapplied to that company again, and out of that 40 applications, I had an interview with them. And the basically, like the recruiter, like, like you had the experience at the company before like, why don't you come in for an interview? And I think that is 1 out of 30 or 40 like applications. That's the only 1 or 2 interview I got.
Yeah.
And you said you're looking mostly on like LinkedIn and like job kind of posting sites, stuff like that.
Yes, LinkedIn, Indeed. I for a college grad student, they also have a website called Handshake. Yes, I do use that as well. Yeah, but most of the time, they all routed me to the company's website.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that is tough too when you're putting those, when you're just copying and pasting stuff into those like pre-formatted type things. I think you lose a lot. Like I think when I'm looking at people's resumes, I'm looking for like hard and soft skills. Like a lot of times that's not a field on one of those like pre-made resume things. So I think finding ways to, if you have a good strong resume visually and you're not able to necessarily convey that through whatever, for whatever reason, the types of jobs you're applying to, the companies you're applying to aren't accepting just like a normal resume PDF, Word document type thing. It might be worth, considering how you're optimizing what you are putting into those fields, and how you can work in and show off the right things. Like, I think that when you put it into one of those systems and it's going to output some resume that looks like everyone else's resume, it becomes harder to stand out. So like that content that you put in there, even how you format it within the field itself, right, is gonna, if it lets you use Markdown or HTML or whatever, like that's gonna help your resume stand out from the others. Because that is the toughest part, right? Is getting your foot in the door. I think talking to recruiters, reaching out to recruiters, connecting on LinkedIn, making sure that your LinkedIn is like up to date and has the right stuff, getting those keywords in there are really important, because once you get your foot in the door, then it's really the ball's in your court to get the job. And I think it's a lot easier. I find it's a lot easier once I can just communicate myself to people rather than having to like try and play the guessing game of like what I need to put in this field or what I need to put on this resume or what keywords are they looking for that are going to get, auto filtered in or out or whatever. But yeah, that is really tough. And unfortunately I don't have a ton of advice for how to get through kind of those auto filters and those preset kind of application things.
JobScan is a great place to go. You can upload your resume into JobScan, and it can scan through the keywords, the formatting. It's actually a site that some recruiters use to filter through resumes. So for anybody listening, and / for you, Richard, you might want to run your resume through that. Also, Richard, do you want to go ahead and pull up your LinkedIn profile real quick and share it over? Because then we can have Peter take a look at it.
Sure.
Peter, I can't help but notice while he's pulling this up that you have first of all, you have a Foo Fighters shirt on, which, might I say, I like it. Second, you have a lot going on in the back there.
Yeah. This is my bedroom in my my apartment here. So like got my shelves back there with a lot of different stuff on there that I like. I've got some hockey stuff. I'm a big Caps fan. Got some Star Wars stuff, some car stuff,
Star Wars
some
is a classic.
D&D stuff, Stranger Things stuff,
Mhm.
bunch of nerd stuff that a guy in a tech job would probably have.
I
But yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring that up because one of the things that I actually have on my resume that I've been told to take off, but I refuse to, is I have a small interest section, and I list basically those things that I just said, like hockey, photography, architecture and stuff like that. And I don't think I've ever had an interview for a job where at least one person in the interview process didn't bring up something from that section that we talked about in the interview. And again, like that's such a great way to calm yourself down and to, get more comfortable is to like talk to someone who's also like, yeah, I love ice hockey. I used to play when I was in high school. And, oh, cool. Like, and talk about that for 5-10 minutes, and that person, again, that person's going to remember you as the guy that played ice hockey, if nothing else. Right. And if they're interviewing 30 or 40 guys, being the guy that played ice hockey might just be the thing that makes them remember you when they're actually like making that hiring decision. So I think it's great to put it on there. A lot of people say don't do it, but it's a small amount of space, and I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna counter you a little bit here. I'll ask you this: like, for someone who is just getting into the analytics field, right? Let's say, like for example, Richard just graduated from college, so he's not gonna have a really deep uh, line of experience. So we try to keep the resume to one page at that point.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that it's more important for somebody who's starting out in the field to list any relevant experience at all that they have working than interest. Would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, so I would say definitely interest is like I have a sidebar on my resume where I have just my basic education, I have my hard skills, I have my soft skills, I have my interests, and those are just bullet pointed things, very small in the margin. And then at the bottom, I have other work experience, and it's just again bullet pointed previous jobs I had. The bulk of my resume is my relevant work experience, where I put relevant jobs, or when I came out of grad school, I just put relevant coursework. So whatever job, if I applied for this temp job at a healthcare place, oh, these are the healthcare policy classes I took, and this is what I did in them. When it was for something more analytical, these are the stats classes, these are the econ classes, stuff like that. So you can definitely fill out the resume with, you should absolutely have all the relevant stuff. That should be the big bulk of your resume. But yeah, I just have, like I said, I have like maybe 4 bullet points in the side under my soft skills of like a couple of interests that, to me, like if you've got an inch of real estate on there, it's worth throwing on there.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got extra space and you need something to fill, I would 100% say that that's something to make your resume stand out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm happy, Richard. I'm happy to share my resume formatting with you if you want after this. But I'm taking a look at your LinkedIn right now.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Richard, you want to go ahead and stream that over real quick?
Sure.
Yeah. So up top here in your about, I think it's good. You've got some hard skills here: Excel, SQL, Python, data cleaning, model assessment, data visualization. I would maybe like put in some of the tools that if you're doing like data visualization, are you doing like BI, Power BI, Tableau, that kind of stuff? I would definitely list out any real hard skills that you have, the softwares that you're using. Let's see, and then in your experience down here, so you've got the fraud specialist. So I think something that you could beef up here with the fraud specialists would be, you have like analyze customers' online activities, and online activity for out of pattern logins and stuff like that. Like, how did you do that? Were there tools that you used? Were those in-house tools? Were those things that you built? Were you working with raw data? I think like if you can connect some of the hard skills that you talk about up top to some of the projects and the work that you did, like that's always helpful to show.
Yeah, I can see in this about section here, you have Excel, SQL, and Python. There's no reason not to have that right at the top of the page.
Right. Here is another question I do have. I did some project in school. Some of them, they're just basically homework. Do you think it's okay, like, to put that in the work experience section? Like.
Oh yeah, absolutely, like 100%. I think going back to sort of what I said about the skills assessment that I've given out, a lot of what I'm interested in when I give that skills assessment is process. Like what is the process you went through to solve this problem, to get to your answer? Because if you have good process, if you're a good critical thinker, if you have good analytical skills and stuff like that, like that's going to show even if you don't get the right answer. So if you have projects that you did, if you have work that you did that had a process to get you there, like absolutely show that off, make that a talking point, make that something that, again, you can tell a story about. Because I think that to me is more important than having the perfect technical skills or having the perfect answer to a skills assessment, or like even having like, the most beautiful portfolio of, stuff you've done or built. I would say if you are going to show that off, in LinkedIn or on your resume or through a portfolio or some way, like make sure that you tell that story and you communicate that story. Don't just give someone a link to, oh yeah, I made this Tableau thing that shows cool data. Yeah, if it's a great dashboard that like speaks for itself and doesn't need any other words, like that's awesome and perfect. But like realistically, like it's probably going to need some explanation, and that explanation should be about like the process. We were asked to do this thing. I decided to do it this way. Here's how I did it. Here's the end result, and even if it wasn't perfect, again, you can say, and like, here's what I learned. I thought that doing it this way was going to be compelling, but it ended up like not really demonstrating what I had hoped. And so like I learned from that experience about how to do it this other way or something like that, because that's another big thing, is like learning from mistakes, learning from criticism and stuff is a really important thing in a job. And so if someone shows me something like, yeah, this was my first pass at something, and here's what I learned from it, like that's going to go a long way in my decision on like whether I want to hire that person.
Specifically, as we're moving forward, Richard, we're going to be working a little bit in Tableau. And so you can actually link your Tableau public portfolio that we'll be building out in a featured section on your LinkedIn profile. And you can customize a description and title for it there. And so that would be a great way to not only show off the work that you did, but also provide a brief explanation of it just at a glance. And then that'll probably open up the discussion for a recruiter at some point in time. Like, hey, I noticed you feature some of your work. Can you talk about it a little bit more?
That's a great idea. Yes, I was thinking about like building a Tableau portfolio for a while, but sometimes I just worry about the quality of the analysis, the quality of the dashboard. Like I might not be more advanced in Tableau. What if the quality of the dashboard is not as good?
Yeah, I think, I can only speak for myself. There may be some people out there that are looking, for certain positions or certain companies, they're looking for perfect, amazing work that has to be like, perfect from day one, especially if you're, applying for like some consultant job or something where they expect you to come in and know all this stuff. But, for a lot of entry level stuff, for a lot of mid-level stuff, like every company's different, every job's different. You know, our developers that we're hiring at mid and even senior positions for our company who have been writing JavaScript web apps for years and years, even they take like 3 to 6 months to like fully understand the business and the environment and the app that we've built and stuff like that, you know? So I think, again, when you're interviewing, when you're applying for jobs, you kind of almost have to like hijack things in some ways, and you have to like flip it around and show what you want to show. So maybe the work isn't perfect, or maybe you don't feel like it's perfect or whatever, but like, again, if you can flip that, instead of saying like, hey, here's a portfolio of perfect work, say, hey, here's a portfolio of all the stuff that I've learned, and like, here's how I learned it, and here's how I'm continuing to learn that and improve that. And I think like, if you start thinking that way, you'll feel a lot more confident, which will be really helpful. And also, you'll communicate the story that I think a lot of employers really want to hear.
That's great to hear. I have a lot of ideas and I want to analyze all sort of data. It's just, I keep thinking about what if it's not good, like this what if situation.
I mean, like, this is gonna sound like I'm my therapist here. Like, what if it's not good? Is that the end of the world? No, it's not. Like it, you know, it, again, like someone who plays around with things, someone who's always learning new things. I have so much crappy little code projects that I've put together that half work that I work on for like a month and then kind of abandon. But like I always send like a little link to my boss and just like, hey, I like kind of learned how to do this thing. It was kind of cool. And it's horrible work, but like I learned how to do a thing and that was important. And then, I'm going to be able to apply that thing later in my job, and it'll probably be written a lot better by a professional developer. So, I like that. I think I wouldn't worry about that. I think like you touched on, Hunter, like imposter syndrome, like that's something that we all deal with. And I have a book that I'm reading right now called The Imposter's Handbook, and it's written for people who, are self-trained in coding or who have learned on the job, who like didn't go to school for it. And it's sort of like, here's all these foundational concepts and principles that you inherently understand, but like, here's all the like cool, post grad level, names for these algorithms, or here's what's going on that like you would learn in, freshman year of CS degree or something like that. Like, so that and the whole point is like, it makes you feel a little bit more confident when you're in the room and you're hearing all the big words and you're like, oh, I actually already knew what that meant. I just didn't know it was called that. So I think, that those are things that you learn on the job. Those are things that you kind of like pick up, but everybody, even the most skilled, experienced people going into new jobs don't know a lot, and you're not expected to. So I would say play to your strengths, show your story, remember that, again, you're there to take work off of this person's desk. And so if you can do that and you can do that well enough, like that gets you a job. I can't tell you how many times I say, you know what, this isn't perfect at work, but it's 80% there and I've got the deadline and this will do. And like, and you do it and you move on. And that's okay to do, right? As long as it works, like, yeah, I didn't add all the bells and whistles I wanted, but whatever, like I got the basic part done. So, I think like that's really what you want to show people. And like some things that I have asked in interviews, people talk a lot about like candidates asking questions in interviews. And I think that's something that I've done a really good job at. And, I asked directly, what is something that you have on your desk right now that if you hired me, you'd expect me to do? Because that tells them, one, I know what I'm here for. And two, it tells me, if they tell me something where I'm like, oh my God, I can never do that, then I'm going to be like, this is not the job for me. Right. But 9 times out of 10, it's something that I'm like, oh yeah, I do that every day already, at my current job or whatever. So I think that's a great question. Another one is, what does success in this position look like in 3 months and in 6 months, right? That's going to tell you kind of what the learning curve is there. I think when you hear that, you're going to feel a lot more reassured, because they're going to say, oh, well, within 3 months, I expect you to start doing a couple of things on your own. But the first 3 months, we're going to be teaching you a ton of stuff, right? And, 6 months, we're going to expect you to be doing more stuff on your own. So, you can ask those like up front early on in an interview. And I think that'll like set you at ease a little bit as well. And, I've had all sorts of people ask all sorts of questions on interviews, but the ones that are asking me questions about the business, the company, and the role, like those are the ones that stand out to me.
Yeah. Well, we're approaching the hour-long mark here, so we're getting ready to come to a close. I literally couldn't think of a better way to summarize what we've talked about in this discussion, other than what you just said. You pretty much just hit the nail on the head. Richard, did that spur any other questions for you, or?
I was gonna ask that question like at the end of the interview, what to ask. Like Peter, you basically answered that question. Yes. I do have another question. So I experienced that before. So what if in the interview, the interviewer asked me some of the question and I don't know about it? What should I say, or what should I do at that point to save it?
Well, I'm going to have to answer this 2 ways. One is, you can't be afraid to bomb interviews. You just have to accept that like sometimes you are going to bomb an interview. You're going to interview for a job that you are not qualified for. And that's okay. I did that. I had some friends that work for the Baltimore Ravens. They were hiring an analyst that they were using SQL for. They were like, dude, you should apply for this. This is so cool working for the Ravens. I'm like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Like, let me do that. I got to that interview and I was feeling like pretty good. I was like, yeah, I brushed up on my SQL and all this stuff. And like, they were asking for analysis of like millisecond level telemetry data of all the players on the field, and like analyzing based on their relational data, like being able to come up with ways to teach the quarterback how to read the defense formations. And I was just like, that is so far beyond what I could do. And like within 2 or 3 questions of that interview, they knew and I knew this was not the right thing. So we just talked about football for like a half hour and just went our separate ways. And it wasn't the right job for me. And like, that's okay. That will happen sometimes. I think if you're feeling like, oh, this is a really good fit, this is the right job for me, but you hit that one stumbling question, or that one where you're like, man, like I should know the answer to this, or I do know the answer, but I can't come up with it, or even I don't know this one. Again, go back to process and say, I honestly don't know exactly what I would do there, but here's my thinking. I would want to approach it this way. And it's literally okay to say, here's my approach. Here's the things I know. Here's the things I want to know. And I assume that Python could do X, Y, or Z, or SQL could do X, Y, or Z. I don't know the exact syntax for that right now, but like I know that I could Google that and go read the documentation, and then you can even start to turn that corner into that story that you have prepared, right? Of like, I had another time where like I wanted to do this thing and I didn't know exactly how to do it, and here's how I overcame that and went through the documentation and figured it out. Or here's how I got to the answer for this other thing. And so now you've not only showed, okay, I'm thoughtful, I would have a good approach to this problem, I know how to get help, I know how to ask for help, and also this isn't the first time that I've ever come across something that was a challenge for me, but like I overcame it, and here's a story for how I did that. So I think that's how you would turn the corner there.
Oh wow, that's I never thought about that before, because if you don't know about anything, if you don't know about the question, that's sort of weakness. What you just said is basically just turn the weakness into the problem solving skill.
Yeah.
Like that's pretty awesome. Like to do it that way.
But yeah, so I'm glad that answered your question. Richard, do you have any others or?
Um, what do you think makes a solid like business analyst or just analyst in general?
Yeah, I think for that I would go back to what I said earlier about knowing the business you're in, knowing what you're analyzing, knowing why you're analyzing it. And again, that doesn't mean you have to be like the CEO, super businessman, know everything about the company and stuff like that. But it means that you have to understand, like, if someone's asking you to provide analysis, there's a reason for that, right? There's a context to that, and they may not be communicating that to you. They may just say, oh, I want to see these pricing trends. But like, if you can start to say, well, why do they want to see those pricing trends? What are they concerned about? Are they concerned about prices going down? Are they concerned about prices going up? Like, how can I convey this, and how can I, like, take that a step further? Or how can I present it in a way that, gets them the answer they need to within the context of that problem, right? How if I know that someone's worried about pricing volatility, I might display things differently. I'm not going to change the data. I'm not necessarily going to change the analysis, but I might display it differently in a context of like, okay, here is something that really well communicates volatility or shows that it's not super volatile if that's the analysis. So yeah, I think the people who make the best analysts, the people who make the best developers, machine learning, all that stuff, anything in those fields, are the ones who take the time to understand the business that they're in, and then put their analysis, put their code, put their product building in that context. And you will impress all the people that are reading your analysis if you do that, because it will stand out from the other analysts who just said, here's the numbers, right?
Right.
So I would say the other thing about that too is, if you understand the business and the context around the business, you will ask more questions, and you'll ask the right questions. And I think that's something that a lot of people, that's kind of like an underappreciated skill. And I think it's something as a manager that I appreciate more, is like, when someone is going to take my time to ask questions and I need to answer them and all that stuff, if they're just throwing a ton of questions at me, like, I don't have time for that. I got to go do other stuff. But if they're very pointed and they're asking really good questions, like, I'm going to stop and really take the time to answer, because I know I'm going to get way better work out of that person if I give them the answers, because they're asking the right questions. So I think asking the right questions as an analyst is like really important.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, so with that final note, we're gonna wrap things up here. Peter, if somebody is watching this and they want to get in touch with you, is the best way to do that on LinkedIn? Or...
Yeah, just add me on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. And Richard, same goes for you?
Yes.
All right. Well, their LinkedIn's will be in the description. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Obviously, it was a pleasure having you both on. I thought this went really well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great
Thank you so
to meet
much.
you guys and talk to y'all.
And I hope we'll get to talk to you again soon. So take care, everybody listening, and have a good weekend.
All right.